back to another episode of the Nurture Effect podcast, hosted by Dr. Anthony Biglan, a pioneer in prevention science, best known for his work on nurturing environments, community-level behavior change, and his books, The Nurture Effect and Rebooting Capitalism. Today's guest is Dr. Mark Van Ryzin, an associate research professor at the University of Oregon and research scientist at the Oregon Research Institute, whose work focuses on prevention science, youth development, and the power of relationships to shape lifelong outcomes. His research examines how families, schools, and peer relationships influence children's social, emotional, and behavioral development, with a particular emphasis on scalable, evidence-based interventions that can improve well-being for children and communities. Please join us for this insightful conversation with Dr. Mark Van Ryzin.
I'm happy to introduce you to Mark Van Ryzin, who is a friend and colleague. And I got to know him maybe 10 years ago, and I was impressed by his empirical work, and also pleased to discover that he's a wonderful human being. So I asked AI to give me an assessment of his work. And so here's what AI came up with. His overall assessment: I would describe Van Ryzin's work this way. It is one of the most promising and theoretically integrated contemporary programs of universal adolescent prevention research. Its special importance lies in showing that restructuring routine classroom interactions may simultaneously improve peer relationships, prosocial behavior, mental health, engagement, and substance use and bullying outcomes. The evidence includes randomized school-level trials and unusually detailed tests of developmental mechanisms. However, much of the evidence comes from two relatively small cluster randomized studies, especially one foundational 15-school trial, so larger independent replications and long-term objective outcomes are still needed before concluding that it ranks with the most firmly established prevention systems. So on that note, I'd like to introduce you to Mark Van Ryzin. And Mark, I wonder if you'd actually start by saying, how did you ever get into this business? Because I think you had a history before you started being a behavioral scientist.
Oh, sure. I was in technology. My undergraduate degree was computer science. I got to work all over the world during the boom of technology at the turn of the century, and it was fun and exciting and many, many opportunities. But when things started to go flat in the early 2000s, I don't know if you remember the tech bubble, the dot bomb.
Right.
Technology became less exciting, less frothy, fewer opportunities, more of a slog. And I realized I didn't really enjoy what I was doing. And so I wanted to go back to school and figure out what that was, what that was going to be. And so I decided on education and packed up. I was in the Bay Area at the time, packed up and moved back to Minneapolis and got a PhD. And while I was there, I had two very fortuitous experiences. One was getting connected with folks that run something called the Minnesota Longitudinal Study, which is really a study of at-risk youth who became parents and parented their own children, and their children grew up. And so there's a number of different generational transitions that became really fascinating. And the core of what they were studying was attachment and the ways in which attachment influences behavior. And I originally thought I was going to Minnesota to study children, young children, and play, and the idea of free play, and the ways in which fewer restrictions on play can lead to more developmentally healthy outcomes for children. But the attachment literature just hooked me, and I got really interested in attachment transitions during adolescence.
And could you define attachment for people who might not know what you mean by that?
Sure. It's a process by which children and their parents interact. It creates models in the mind of the child about the expectations they can have when it comes to social interactions with other people. And so if a parent is consistently responsive to the needs of the child, then the child develops a secure attachment, which is to say that they believe that other people can be a source of comfort and safety. On the other hand, if the parent is dismissive or maybe erratically supportive, sometimes dismissive, then the child develops other models that are less healthy. In some cases, believing that people are simply not reliable sources of support, and that I really need to go it alone. I can't count on other people to be there for me, and so there's no need to invest in personal relationships. That's one approach. Another approach that children develop is when caregivers are more erratic, they believe that they often have to amplify their calls for support, which creates a real a sort of what we call an anxious attachment style, where there is some belief in the ability to obtain support from other people, but that support has to be demanded, it has to be elicited, it has to be manipulated, and so people that have this sort of approach to relationships are often seen as, very anxious or very clingy or very needy or that kind of thing.
Manipulative.
Yeah, exactly. Trying to get something that they think they need by behaving in ways that are meant to elicit a certain response.
Mm-hmm.
The core idea is that these models, when they're developed in the mind of a child, they guide that child's approach to relationships throughout their lives. And that's not to say that it's deterministic. There's definitely ways in which an insecure attachment style can become secure through being involved in very close supportive relationships, or the alternative direction is possible as well. I actually published a really interesting paper on transitions between secure and insecure attachment, and things that can facilitate or cause those kind of transitions. But anyway, I quickly realized that adolescence was a fascinating time. When it came to attachment, that's when peers become attachment figures for the first time, and the child begins to transition away from the family. Parents no longer maybe being the key attachment figures, but it becomes peers, and then it becomes romantic partners, really setting the stage for youth to become heads of their own families. So I found that to be really super interesting time, this transition. And the more I read about it, the more it became clear that peer relationships were a really pervasive and powerful influence on a wide range of student outcomes. And so I actually even published some research finding that as youth age through the adolescent transition, not only does the kind of parenting that parents are required to do, that changes, but in fact, overall, the importance of parenting becomes less, and the importance of peers grows as children get older and they transition through adolescence. At the same time, I was lucky enough to take a class in a small group instructional model called Cooperative Learning from a couple of the real experts in the field who are at the University of Minnesota. And one of the in addition to all the work that they've done finding, how this instructional technique boosts achievement, the fascinating part to me was that it can really boost positive peer relationships. When students are working together in small groups in this structured way, and this was a highly structured pedagogical approach, they all have the opportunity to contribute. They all have the opportunity to make a difference for the group. Everyone has a job, everyone has a role, and there's all kinds of scaffolding for positive interactions. And as a result, you can develop positive peer relationships. And it was one of the few things that exists really anywhere in the literature when it comes to a teacher's ability to actually help students make friends.
So I got a question.
Yes.
Pedagogy, what does that mean?
Instructional approach, instructional model.
Okay. You were talking about the development of it. These are the Johnson brothers, is that correct?
David and Roger Johnson. Yeah. And so positive peer relations. There's very, very little a teacher can do to help a student make friends. A teacher has the ability to build a relationship with a student themselves, but doesn't have many tools in the tool chest when it comes to helping them make friends with other kids. And that's really what students need. That's by far the biggest protective factor in adolescence is having solid, supportive relationships with friends. And so this cooperative learning model was fascinating to me. And as soon as I was able, I started to write grants and began to study it. And I was interested in what happens when you are able to build these positive peer relationships. What kind of other effects can that create? And so I ended up finding there was all these cascading models whereby positive peer relationships lead to the development of social skills, feeling of belonging, more integrated social network, a wider range of friends, stronger friendships, lower social stress, and all of these things in turn would have very positive and powerful effects on student behavior and mental health.
Well, actually, elaborate on that. I think what you're saying is that those kinds of positive social conditions prevent a wide variety of problems that we've typically thought of as just something that the individual has.
Mm-hmm. Oh, sure. A bullying arises from certain social conditions, victimization. Youth are uniquely vulnerable to victimization because of social conditions. They don't have friends that will defend them, for example. Drug use arises from certain social conditions where socially isolated youth aggregate and adopt antisocial behavioral norms, and these are the groups that get into trouble early in middle school. And experimenting with drugs is a key part of that. And mental health mental health conditions are made much worse by things like social stress that can arise from negative maladaptive peer relations. So there are a lot of things that can be done in school to counteract some of these risky social processes. Essentially, schools don't have to invest time and money in externally created prevention programs. They can simply change what teachers are doing for the 7 hours a day that they have kids in class, and that can be a prevention model, a powerful prevention model, all by itself.
So describe in a little more detail what happens in cooperative learning. If I'm a teacher and I'm going to work with kids, and let's say I'm teaching 7th grade, I'm teaching, let's say, math. How does cooperative learning work in that?
Well, there's certain conditions that have to be present in order for small group work to be successful. One is that you have to be very specific about what each member of the group is doing. Everyone has to have a job or a task or a role that contributes to the success of the group. And then as a teacher, you have to make sure that there is a way for students to be recognized, not just for their own success in their role, but also the success of the group to encourage, helping behavior within the group. So we succeed or fail as a group. So there's an aspect of that, and there's an aspect of individual success. So we want to make sure that there are what we call multi-level contingencies, whereby a student can do well if they simply ignore their group, do their own work, but they can be even more successful if their group is successful. Meanwhile, we need to be scaffolding group skills so that students understand how to work well in groups, the kinds of behaviors that contribute to group success. So we're scaffolding that, observing for that, reinforcing that.
So I've got these kids in groups of
no more than 4.
No more than 4. Okay, so I got these kids organized in groups of 4. How did I choose who goes into what group?
Randomization is usually recommended just because it gives students a chance to work with other students that they might not otherwise have a chance to work with. It can be very dangerous to let students choose their own groups because friends will pick one another and then they'll socialize rather than...
And maybe pick on some other kids.
Or kids may not be picked at all. And of course, we all understand the humiliation of not being picked, or being on the playground and being the last one picked and on the team, that sort of thing. So, very, very dangerous. But when we do randomization, we also have to make sure that students have ways of becoming comfortable with one another. And so we want to make sure that there's lots of mutual disclosure built into what we're doing, making sure that kids have a chance to share with one another and develop a sort of a common rapport. For example, we would say something like when there's some reading to be done, for example, take turns reading out loud, and the person with the most pets will go first. And so we have students talking for a few minutes about their pets, which, is one of the ways we bond with each other, just getting to know one another, seeing one another as people rather than.
So before I'm going to do the learning task, I'm going to say something about myself, and you arrange it so that over time everybody does that.
Everybody has a chance to share with other people along many different dimensions: favorite foods, favorite music, how many brothers and sisters, where are you from? All there's unlimited ways of doing that, and it helps students to get to know one another and become more comfortable working together.
So I got 4 kids in a group,
mm-hmm.
And the first day, I said math. What might be a math lesson in a 7th grade?
I actually was looking at some lessons like this recently. Very basic math. Oftentimes, if we're solving a word problem, there's a number of different steps, and so we can allocate tasks to different folks in the group. Different members of the group are responsible for doing different steps in a math process, or we're working through some problems together, and I have a problem that I'm responsible for doing, and you have a different one, and you have a third one.
Give me the specifics. What's my role?
Maybe doing the factoring if we're solving some algebra problem, for example, or we're doing some long division, and I've got this problem and you've got that one, and we're working together, and then we're evaluated on the success of our group in terms of getting the right answers.
Okay, so I have this happening with groups of 4 around the classroom.
Yeah, 2 or 3 or 4.
And then there's some social introductions that you were just describing. Mm-hmm. And then is there some sort of summary of how it went in terms of the social relations in that? Mm-hmm. And how long would they be doing this?
Doing a math lesson in middle school? It depends on the school structure. If it's a 7-period day, then they usually have about 50 minutes. If it's a block schedule, they'll have 80 or 90 minutes.
So would my group have one task for 30 minutes or so? Or would there be multiple tasks?
I mean, multiple math problems. Again, going back to the math example, is that the idea here?
Yeah.
Gosh, it depends on the detail. How long does it take to solve a math problem? Are we talking something that takes 30 seconds or 5 minutes or?
I see.
Are they learning the technique from scratch on their own in the groups, or has the teacher introduced it previously through a lecture and now we're just reviewing and applying? How many problems do we feel like students can get through in that time? Do we want to have a check-in? One of the defining features of small group learning is transitions. And so let's say that we are working on a block of problems using a technique that the teacher has taught us or that we've just learned. Or maybe we've learned complementary techniques and we're all responsible for one of them. Oftentimes we'll transition into another group and check our work and see how we did, and then come back to our original group and share what we learned.
And then at the end of this, is there a debrief with that group, how they got along, that kind of thing?
Oh, sure. Yeah. There's a series of best practice calls for a series of brief review processes. When the teacher is scaffolding a social skill, they will define that skill at the beginning of the lesson. They will observe it during the lesson. And then after the lesson, they will discuss how the class did and provide positive behavior support for students that did really well using the skill in their group to facilitate the group process.
So what might be a skill?
Encouraging one another to participate, checking in with one another, seeing if they understand, sharing ideas. I think we should do this. This seems like the right way to go, or just providing some sort of direction. Okay, maybe this is the right way to do it rather than this, something like that. So there's you can define any skill you want,
Right.
and you can make them relevant to the lesson structure as well. Like for example, we have teachers in language arts classes who are trying to teach a specific approach to summarizing some sort of text, and so the social skill involves things that you would say in that kind of context. So
I wanted to ask you about, you've done 2 randomized trials of this, is that correct?
No, we're actually on our 4th.
On 4?
4th, yeah.
Oh, AI didn't catch that. AI told me there were only 2, so I'll correct AI.
There's definitely 2 that have been out for a while, and then the 3rd one, we just published our first paper a couple of months ago, and the second one is currently being reviewed, and then the 4th randomized trial, we're just writing up the results of that now. So that's not even out in press yet.
So results of those trials?
Oh, very consistent. One of them, the initial one, was really where we started to dig into some of these mediating processes, finding that peer relations was the core of the secret sauce that really helps cooperative learning promote all these other great outcomes. Was the thing that really got the ball rolling, essentially. The second trial was where we started to.
So the quality of social relations predicted whether or not they were developing problems, mental health problems, and so on. Is that correct?
Yeah, it mediated all the effects on any sort of behavioral or mental health outcome we could find. So it's the thing that we can shift first. And again, since these things are so important, when we shift that kind of thing in a positive direction, it has lots of downstream effects. The second trial is where we actually built technology to help teachers implement these practices. The first trial, we were working with teachers to implement these kinds of very structured, detailed pedagogies on their own, which, gosh, it was difficult. And this was pre-pandemic. And we were working with middle schools all over Oregon, and we visited them several times a year, which was an unbelievably difficult lift. We had multiple instances of training. I actually had the Johnson brothers fly out and participate in that. We really enjoyed it. Teachers had a great time, but it was a struggle to implement in the classroom. There's a lot of complexity to it, and teachers can explain to students what's about to happen in terms of these, logistics and things. But a lot of times students are not paying close attention. And so as soon as the lesson starts, a teacher will get hands in the air. I don't get it. What am I supposed to be doing? And so the second randomized trial was actually a trial of some technology that we had put together to help teachers manage those logistics. And so students have their devices, and the device tells them, who they're working with and how much time they have in this phase. And it gives them their materials and their task list and tells them whose turn it is, what the next phase is going to be, all the information that students need. So you don't get any confusion. You don't get a million questions. Students just get to work. And so you really have a more efficient way of implementing cooperative learning without all of the confusion and all the questions. So that trial found essentially, again, the same things: positive effects on peer relations, positive effects on behavior, positive effects on mental health. And for the first time, we started measuring social emotional skills using a well-defined framework.
And what grades were these studies done in?
The first one was all middle schools. The second one was middle and high schools together. And the third and fourth are high schools exclusively.
Mm-hmm.
The third and fourth focus on ninth grade. Those trials really are meant to address this concern that a lot of schools in Oregon have about ninth grade, and success in ninth grade being really pivotal to a student's success in high school. That it being a year of transition, but also being a time in which a child's trajectory can be influenced for the good or for the ill. The students who finish ninth grade without all of their credits are several times less likely to graduate. And so there's a lot of concern about how we can prepare incoming students to do well in high school.
So I've studied your list of things that you developed in that study, and it's an incredible, diverse set of things that every kid should have. Could you kind of list those? Because there's some social ones, there's information about social media, getting along with people that you're having problems with. Could you kind of elaborate on that?
Sure. I should back up for a second, though. The second study used this platform all by itself, and we measured the effects of teachers using it to teach standard core subject areas: math, science, social studies, language arts, etc. And we realized quickly that we can make the platform easy to use, but it does require that teachers take what they are teaching and put it into the platform. And in some cases, that's really easy because they're already doing, some kind of group-based thing already. In other cases, they have to take a slide deck and they have to tweak it fairly substantially to make it appropriate for students to learn in a cooperative learning small group context. So it became evident that by introducing the technology, we had reduced the barriers to implementing the pedagogy, but we still had this barrier of curriculum. Where do we get that? And so we have this lesson library where teachers put lessons in that they've created, and it's a very valuable resource, but it doesn't cover every possible situation. And so we found that teachers, over the course of a school year, they became less willing to invest time in building lessons. And so we thought that if we could create a curriculum in advance and load it into the library and make it available, then teachers could do a grab and go, which is what they wanted. And so rather than trying to compete with publishers by doing a math curriculum or a science curriculum or what have you, we realized that a lot of schools were interested in what they call a ninth grade on track or a freshman success curriculum. And this is, the kind of skills that students would need to be successful in high school. And so we created that. And then that was the subject of our fourth randomized trial, using the platform to deliver these, freshman success lessons, which includes a variety of different things, as you were saying. We built lessons on basic study skills, note taking, test preparation, calendaring, setting priorities. But we also had a number of SEL experts help us build lessons on understanding the role of emotions and managing anxiety and coping with stress and communication skills and active listening and providing social support, but also understanding social media.
Well, when I read the lists of what you have, I'm going, every human being needs all of these skills, and there's so much there that isn't taught in school. So I was really impressed by that. And that reminds me, by the way, that my granddaughter, who's just starting at the University of Toronto, and she's a little worried that she doesn't have the skills she needs.
Like different kinds of note taking. The nice thing about doing a small group learning approach when you're practicing trying to impart study skills is that students have a lot of chance to try it out with their peers. And so we have students collaborating on a certain way of reading and taking notes, and then they'll pass their work to another student who will create flashcards, and then they'll pass their work to another student who will provide a critique and feedback. And so there's a lot of opportunities for collaboration to really put the skills into practice rather than just sitting and listening. We're actually getting our hands dirty in that kind of active learning approach.
Well, my granddaughter told me that there's one of the highest dropout rates at the University of Toronto. So she's, she can probably make some friends by sharing these skills with them. So
potentially, yeah. I've
really
actually
good.
worked with some universities on things like retention, and especially universities that draw from a wide, very diverse, set of people. If you have trouble making friends that first year, then chances are that you may not come back. The one way to promote retention is to build community. And the best way to do that is small group learning. And so I've actually trained college teachers on using small group learning as a university-wide technique to promote retention of students, get them feeling like they have friends and they'll come back.
So there's one other topic that I think we might discuss,
Mm-hmm.
but you and I share a level of distress about the difficulty in getting evidence-based practices implemented in schools.
Mm-hmm.
And we're not the only ones. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
the prevention science community is littered with people who are frustrated with the fact that these things haven't been widely adopted. I wonder if you want to comment on that.
Yes, well, I think where teachers are these days in terms of their openness to different ideas is probably the end result of a lot of churn in school level, district level initiatives over the past, 10 years, 15 years, whatever it happens to be. There's a lot of very different things coming their way all the time. Professional development is often not very well done. Professional development sometimes is somebody standing at the front of a room full of teachers and delivering a slide deck. And most folks not really paying attention, because they know that the principal will be gone in another year or two, moving on to a different school, and next year we'll have a brand new set of initiatives that they'll be meant to consider. So I think there's been way too much chasing of fads, way too much churn in ideas without consistency from year to year. And there's maybe a lack of appreciation of the importance of scientific evidence when it comes to deciding what we're going to focus on this year as a school leader, district leader. And so as a result, teachers are often less interested in trying something new because, they've heard it all before, that this is going to save your school. They've tried things and they've found that it hasn't helped, oftentimes because they haven't been given adequate training, they haven't been given adequate preparation, they haven't been given time to really see something through from start to finish. Nothing is going to create wholesale change in 1 week. There's a certain level of patience and persistence that's required to make anything work well.
Well, that makes me wonder, do you have any evidence of the impact of cooperative learning on teacher well-being?
Well, once we had developed this software, we were able to study the impact of that because, as I was saying, previously, it really takes a lot of the logistical burden off the teacher. And so the teacher's role changes substantially from maybe like a slide deck and teacher talk to actually using the software to do small group learning. Instead of being that person on the stage under the spotlight, doing most of the talking, trying to get the class engaged in some kind of whole class discussion, but realizing that students are too shy, nobody wants to speak up, nobody wants to stand out. It's really, really difficult to do, a Socratic seminar or whatever people try to do with adolescents because the reluctance to speak up and make a mistake in front of your peers is just too high. So that is a very stressful way of doing instruction, and unfortunately that's what most people do, and which is, I think, is part of the problem. There's a lot of stress and burnout from teachers trying to do instruction in this way and thinking that all I have to do is stand up in front and explain this and then everyone will get it. And that usually isn't the way it works. And so if we can take the teacher down off the stage and give students access to the content and they're working through it with the support of their peers, they're applying it immediately, they're talking through it, they're potentially making mistakes, peers are helping them, and the teacher has time to move around the room, listen to the students, correct these mistakes, identify misconceptions. So it's a much less stressful approach to teaching. And so we've published results finding that teachers that use this software a couple of times a month have less stress, less burnout, better efficacy, all kinds of things. And we've had teachers tell us This has really transformed my approach to teaching. I am no longer considering leaving the profession because I can see a way forward now where, my job doesn't tax me to the point of exhaustion every single day. We can't really randomly assign a teacher to use the technology or not, because some are willing to and some aren't. And it really has to do with who they are and where they're at in their career and their comfort with technology and all of these things.
One last question. So what's next for this almost famous behavioral scientist?
What we were talking about before regarding the banning of devices in the classroom is going to have an impact on a peer learning software where every student has to have a device to tell them what to do. So we're actually looking at building a next gen version of that is just sort of teacher only. And we're also considering how we can get that into classrooms, into teachers' hands, without having to get them to buy the whole cow, essentially. What happens when you implement the original version of this peer learning software is that you are committed. You are doing best practice for this lesson from start to finish. And you have to understand everything that's happening. You need to understand how to manipulate the software. The students need to understand it. You need to repurpose your curriculum and put it into the software. I mean, it's a pretty big commitment. And so not surprisingly, we don't get a ton of teachers who are willing to take that on. But if we could create a teacher-only software that they could simply download, it doesn't require them to put their lessons into it. It can sort of come alongside existing material rather than having to encapsulate it. And we start with something really simple. Like, for example, we make it easy for teachers to randomize students into groups, and we show the group arrangements up on the board. Okay, and so maybe a teacher just starts with that. And it's funny because a lot of teachers really love the idea of a group randomizer, even if they don't really understand cooperative learning and all the other things they need to be doing. So if we could just get teachers interested in trying a group randomizer during a lesson, I think that we can sort of hook them a little bit and get them starting to move down the path towards best practice. I think if we can solve a problem for teachers, like, gosh, how do I randomize these students into groups? I don't want to, keep making up these groups day after day, because a lot of teachers like to try group work. And even if it isn't really cooperative learning, it's just, throwing students in a group and giving them a task and letting them do the work. That can be problematic. Where one student is doing all the work and others goofing off because we forgot to assign everyone a task. But what we're going to do is we're going to have this group randomizer, but it's going to have all of these other tools built in that teachers will have access to. And then we're going to employ AI to help the teacher understand whether their first try with this was successful or not. And then to suggest ways in which they could start to incorporate some of these additional ideas, slowly lead them down the path from just randomizing students into groups, lead them down the path where they're incorporating additional little bits and pieces of functionality from the tool that get them closer to best practice. Very, very light introduction, and then a very gradual transition where we're prompting them, checking in with them, suggesting ideas. And again, I think AI could be uniquely, useful at doing that. So,
well, I look forward to your progress on all of these things. And as we were discussing before, I'm hopeful that you and I together can develop some ways to work with teens and communities around dealing with things like the harmful marketing of tobacco and alcohol and so on. So I think there are some exciting possibilities. And
thanks for tuning in to the Nurture Effect podcast, a Values to Action initiative. Make sure you subscribe so you never miss an episode. Values to Action is a community of scientists, clinicians, and concerned citizens that seeks to leverage behavioral science, affect change, and make the world a better place for everyone. Join the movement at valuestoaction.org.